The call came at 6:23 a.m. on the 8th of September, 1957. I was already awake, sitting in my office above Small's Paradise, reading the morning papers and drinking coffee that had gone cold hours ago. When the phone rang that early, it usually meant trouble. But when I heard my mother's voice shaking, when I heard the fear and anger mixing in words she could barely get out, I knew this wasn't just trouble. This was war being declared on the most sacred thing in my world. He'd kicked down her door at dawn, claimed he was searching for drugs, then spent 20 minutes destroying everything she owned while calling her names that would make a sailor blush. When he left, he told her this was just the beginning unless her son learned some respect. Officer McKenzie had just made the last mistake of his career. In 72 hours, every cop, criminal, and politician in New York City would whisper his name as a warning about what happens when you touch a queen mother in Harlem. I am Ellsworth Johnson, but these streets call me Bumpy, and when you cross the line with my family, you don't just cross me. You cross an entire neighborhood that knows some debts can only be paid in fear. My mother, Stella Johnson, was 67 years old in 1957. She'd raised 5 children through the Depression, worked 3 jobs to keep us fed, and earned respect through decency and kindness. When neighbors needed food, they went to Stella Johnson. She wasn't involved in my business and represented everything good about Harlem. Officer Raymond McKenzie represented everything wrong with the NYPD 8 years on the force. Worked the 28th precinct, made a career shaking down black businesses and harassing families. He'd been pressuring me for months, demanding tribute, wanting a piece of my operations, but going after my mother, that was war. Bumpy, she said over the phone, her voice still trembling. That man came into my house like he owned it. Broke my good china, the set your father gave me for our wedding. Tore up photographs of you children, scattered them like trash. He stood there laughing while he destroyed 40 years of memories, calling me names I won't repeat. I could hear her, trying not to cry, trying to stay strong the way she'd taught all her children. But I could also hear the violation in her voice, the shame of having her sanctuary invaded, her dignity trampled by someone who saw her as nothing more than leverage. Mama, I said quietly, pack a bag. You are staying at Aunt Ruth's for a few days. I won't be run out of my own home by some corrupt. Mama, please, just for a few days. Let me handle this. After I hung up, I sat in my office for 2 hours thinking, not about revenge. Revenge was emotional, sloppy, the kind of response McKenzie would expect. I was thinking about justice, about consequences, about sending a message that would echo through every police precinct in New York for the next decade. McKenzie had crossed every line that mattered, but more than that, he'd made a tactical error. He'd assumed my mother was vulnerable because she was old, black, and alone. He'd forgotten that in Harlem, nobody stands alone, especially not the woman who'd raised its king. The first call I made was to Detective Ray Kowalski, the one honest cop in the precinct. Ray, I said, I need to know everything about Officer Raymond McKenzie. McKenzie, that is a dangerous question, Bumpy. It is about to become a dangerous situation. My mother called this morning. McKenzie broke into her house, destroyed her property, threatened her. This is personal now. There was silence on the line. Then, Jesus, Bumpy, I am sorry, McKenzie's dirty. Everyone knows it. But he is connected. His uncle is Deputy Commissioner Walsh. His brother-in-law is Judge Harrison. Internal Affairs won't touch him. Then I will. Give me 24 hours before you start any official investigation. The second call was to Illinois Gordon. Illinois, I need a full workup on Officer Raymond McKenzie, where he lives, where he drinks, who he owes money to, what he is afraid of, everything. What did he do? He forgot that my mother is off limits. The third call was to Vincent Torino, the detective whose son I'd saved 3 years earlier. Since that night, Torino and I had developed an understanding, not friendship, but mutual respect. Vincent, I said, I need a favor. A big one. What kind of favor? The kind that keeps a dirty cop from terrorizing elderly women in Harlem. I told him about McKenzie's raid on my mother's house, about the threats, about the systematic harassment. "McKenzie's been a problem for years," Torino admitted. "But he is untouchable. Too many friends in high places." "What if he wasn't?" "What are you thinking, Bumpy?" "I am thinking that corrupt cops rely on their connections to protect them. But connections only work if people believe those connections are stronger than their enemies." By noon, Illinois had everything I needed. McKenzie lived in Queens with his wife and 2 daughters. He owed $15,000 to loan shark Big Eddie Torelli. He drank at Murphy's Tavern every Friday. Most importantly, he was terrified of his wife finding out about his girlfriend, Carla, a dancer at the Pink Flamingo. I spent the rest of the 8th of September making preparations. Not for violence. Violence was easy, and McKenzie wasn't worth easy. I was planning something more permanent, more devastating than broken bones or bullet wounds. I was planning to destroy Officer Raymond McKenzie's life so completely that he'd serve as a warning to every corrupt cop in New York about what happened when you crossed the wrong family. The 9th of September, 10:30 p.m., McKenzie was at Murphy's Tavern, 3 beers deep, complaining to anyone who'd listen about uppity Negroes who don't know their place. The bartender told me later that McKenzie had been bragging about his morning raid, describing in detail how he'd put that old woman in her place, and showed her what happens when coloreds get too comfortable. He was scheduled to work the day shift tomorrow, which meant he'd be leaving around midnight. Driving home drunk through Queens where nobody would witness what happened next. I was waiting in the parking lot. McKenzie stumbled out of Murphy's at 11:47 p.m., keys in hand, probably too drunk to drive, but too arrogant to care. He saw me leaning against his car, and his hand moved instinctively toward his service weapon. "Bumpy Johnson," he slurred. "You come here to apologize for disrespecting the NYPD?" "Actually," I said, "I came here to have a conversation about my mother. Your mother got exactly what she deserved, and she'll get more of the same unless you start showing proper respect to your betters." I looked at this man, this racist, corrupt coward who hid behind a badge while terrorizing elderly women, and I felt something colder than anger. I felt certainty. "Officer McKenzie," I said quietly, "do you know what is going to happen over the next 48 hours? You are going to threaten me. I am going to arrest you. And your mother's going to get another visit." I handed him an envelope. "Open it." McKenzie squinted at photographs. Him with Carla. Taking money from Big Eddie, removing evidence from the precinct. His face went pale. "Where did you get these?" "Wrong question. Right question is, what am I going to do with them?" McKenzie's hand moved toward his gun again, but I was ready. More than ready. I'd been waiting for this moment since 6:23 a.m., calculating every word, every gesture, every psychological pressure point that would break this man without lifting a finger. "I wouldn't," I advised, my voice dropping to the tone that made grown men reconsider their life choices. "Those photographs have been copied, 20 sets, distributed to 20 different people across the city. Newspaper editors, internal affairs investigators, your wife's bridge club friends. If something happens to me tonight, all 20 sets get delivered simultaneously." McKenzie's hand stopped moving. "What do you want?" "First, you are going to visit my mother's house tomorrow morning. You are going to apologize for destroying her property. You are going to pay for the repairs, and you are going to explain to her that the search was based on false information. And then you are going to transfer out of Harlem, request a different precinct, different assignment, somewhere far away from my neighborhood and my family. And if I refuse?" I smiled, and it wasn't a pleasant smile. "Then on the 11th of September, your wife receives copies of those photographs, along with a detailed report of your activities. On the 12th of September, Internal Affairs gets their copy. On the 13th of September, the Amsterdam News runs a front-page story about police corruption in Harlem. By the 14th of September, you are unemployed, divorced, and probably facing criminal charges." McKenzie stared at the photographs, calculating his options, realizing he didn't have any good ones. "You can't prove any of this," he said weakly. "I don't have to prove anything," I replied. "I just have to create enough doubt, enough scandal, enough embarrassment that your protectors decide you are not worth protecting anymore. I leaned closer, made sure he could see the certainty in my eyes. But here is what you really need to understand, Officer McKenzie. This isn't about business. This isn't about territory or money or respect. This is about my mother. You violated her home, terrified her, treated her like she was less than human because of the color of her skin. I paused, let that sink in. So even if you apologize, even if you transfer, even if you disappear from Harlem forever, I want you to remember this moment. I want you to remember that crossing my family was the beginning of the end of everything you thought you could get away with. McKenzie visited my mother on the 10th of September, apologized and paid for repairs. He transferred to Staten Island that week. By October, Big Eddie found out about his financial troubles. By December, McKenzie was divorced, demoted, and working warehouse security in New Jersey. The story spread through the NYPD like wildfire, whispered in locker rooms and patrol cars, shared over coffee and cigarettes. Not the details. Those were kept quiet to protect people who'd helped me. But the general outline became legend. Officer McKenzie had crossed Bumpy Johnson's mother, and within 72 hours his entire life had fallen apart like a house of cards in a hurricane. For the next 5 years, whenever a cop in Harlem thought about shaking down a business or harassing a family, someone would mention Raymond McKenzie's name. Just a whisper, just a reminder of what could happen when you forgot that some people in this community were protected by more than the law. My mother lived the rest of her life without police harassment. Not just because McKenzie was gone, but because every cop understood that Stella Johnson was untouchable. She replaced her broken china, reframed her scattered photographs, and continued organizing church events with renewed dignity. The woman who'd raised Bumpy Johnson, who'd taught him the difference between power and bullying, who represented everything decent about Harlem, she was sacred. McKenzie spent the rest of his career as a broken man, jumping at shadows, checking over his shoulder, wondering if today would be the day someone else decided he needed another lesson. He'd wake up in cold sweats, remembering the parking lot conversation, the photographs, the moment he realized his badge couldn't protect him from the consequences of his choices. Every whispered conversation at work, every sideways glance from fellow officers, every unexplained phone call reminded him that he'd crossed the wrong family and lived only because mercy, not weakness, had spared him. When you wear a uniform, when you carry a gun, when you have authority, you have a choice. You can use that power to protect people or to exploit them. Officer McKenzie chose exploitation, chose to terrorize an elderly woman because he thought her skin color made her vulnerable. He learned, as many men before him learned, that in Harlem some people aren't vulnerable. Some people are queens, protected by kings who understand that family is sacred and respect is earned through strength. 72 hours. That is all it took to turn Officer McKenzie from a feared authority into a whispered warning about what happens when you forget that power. Without honor is just bullying, and bullies always meet someone stronger. All she needed to know was that her son had protected her, that her home was safe, that the man who'd violated her sanctuary would never hurt her again. Officer Raymond McKenzie crossed that line on the 8th of September 1957. By the 11th of September, his name was whispered throughout the city as a cautionary tale about what happens when corrupt cops forget that some people in Harlem are untouchable,